of many countries, especially in Europe, on the steps they took, on what they did right. In a minute, I'm going to share an article with you that talks a little bit more about it, but just to kind of give you a little news and information on what Israel did. From the very beginning, Israel shut everything down. They were one of the first countries to do so. Just back in March, when news of the COVID virus began to hit all of us, they immediately shut everything down. Not only, of course, schools and workplaces, but people actually were limited to where they could go. Some people, of course, were limited, many people were limited to how far away they could go from their own homes. Only certain times of the day, and only certain members of the family could even go to a grocery store. Masks were required from a very early time. Maybe that all contributed to it. Those of you who've been to Israel, you know they have an incredible medical system. In Israel, what really helps is everyone is given government-backed health insurance. You can choose to take on private health insurance if you like, but you don't have to. But everyone's given basic insurance, which is something I know that we struggle with, and I hope changes one day, to be honest with you. So everyone has better health care, which certainly helps in times like this. People weren't afraid to go to the doctor. They knew they could afford to go to the doctor. They knew they could get the help they needed. There were many places they could go and seek advice. Testing, while certainly not perfect there, but testing's been widely available in Israel. And people took it very seriously. Now, of course, we in America have very different challenges. As diverse as Israel is, we have an even more diverse population. And of course, obviously, we're a much, much larger country of over 350 million people living in very different regions with different municipalities in different states, different local officials. Some have done better than others in terms of the reactions to the COVID crisis. Israel was one reaction, one way to handle this, was monolithic throughout its country. But yet, Israel, as I mentioned, of course, it still has a very diverse population. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, some of whom do not listen to government authorities, don't feel they're really under the jurisdiction of secular authorities. And of course, the Arab Israelis themselves. I'm pleased to tell you that the Arab Israelis have been incredible through this whole process. We can be very proud, and I think it's obviously a good thing. It needs to get even better. Many Arab Israelis are doctors, nurses, pharmacists, work side by side by their Jewish colleagues. It's really nice to see. And of course, even more needs to be done to help the Arab Israelis feel a full part of Israel. But that really helped. And there have not been major problems in Arab Israeli towns. They've taken it very seriously. And even the United Nations, which is often the first to criticize Israel, has come out and praised Israel often on its reaction and how it's worked with not only Arab Israelis, but also Palestinians in keeping the crisis under control. It's been really good to see. In the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, not as good. There have been some problems. Some of the hot spots have been in some of the more ultra-Orthodox areas. It took them a little bit longer to shut down the yeshivas, the Orthodox schools, to stop praying together in a minyan, to stop the large life cycle events, whether they're weddings or funerals. And there were some problems in some of the ultra-Orthodox areas, and whether they're in Bnei Brak outside of Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem, in Mea Shearim and other ultra-Orthodox Jewish areas. It took them a little while to get there, but they did eventually. And for the most part, the crisis has been contained even in those highly densely populated areas as well. So what did Israel do right? And what can we learn from? So I want to bring you to an article that you can find online. It's a place I check really almost every day. And it is called timesofisrael.com. And I love Times of Israel because it's a very center. It's not right wing, it's not left wing. It's very center on how it reports on what's happening in Israel. They do a really nice job. So, for some reason it's not there. Give me just a second. I'm going to open it up. And okay, here it is. Let me now share this article with you. I love Times of Israel because, as I said, it's a very even-handed approach on what's happening in Israel. In this article, entitled, It's Not Over, and Uncertainty Abounds, but Israel's COVID-19 stats are stunning. And this was written by David Horowitz, who's the editor of timesofisrael.com. And he goes through at the very beginning, talking about some of the things Israel didn't do right, like any country, and there have been some failures. And yet, and I'm going to pick up where he says right here, and yet, just look at the numbers, the horrifying, heartbreaking death tolls around the world. As of this writing, Israel's population, 9.2 million people, has suffered 219 fatalities in the coronavirus pandemic. Of nearly 16,000 confirmed cases, more than half have now recovered. Fewer than 100 Israelis are currently on ventilators. Compare those figures to other countries. If you go to worldometers.count, which is really an amazing place to go, based on approximately the same stats, Israel has 25 fatalities per million citizens, which puts us at about 50th in the world and better than the global average. Certainly not peerless, but striking nonetheless. And then it compares Israel to some other countries. For example, Belgium, which has a population of 11 million, a little bit larger, has 7,500 fatalities, 34 times as many as Israel. Britain, 26,000 victims. Spain, 24,000 dead. Italy, 28,000. Now, these are, of course, larger countries population-wise, but percentage-wise, a much larger death toll. Austria and Germany, ahead of Israel in their moves. Austria has 600 dead. Germany, 6,500. No, as I said earlier, one death is too many. But if you judge Israel's reaction to the COVID virus, remarkably well. Thank God Israel has not had more people pass away from this crisis. And then the author, David Horowitz, compares Israel's numbers to other Jewish communities. And we know, of course, that there have been Jewish communities, whether they're here or in England, that have been hit particularly hard by the COVID crisis. But I love what he wrote here, and it's something very interesting. He writes, Israel's relative success is reflected in such comparative statistics, indeed, is prompting growing calls for Israel to reverse the norm by which diaspora Jewry rushes to help it at times of emergency, and to urgently reach out with effective assistance to a diaspora in pandemic crisis. So I thought that was interesting. In other words, we're used to Israel, we're used to us helping Israel. But as we found over the last few years, and especially now, sometimes Israel can really help us. Take you back to Hurricane Harvey, those of us in Houston who suffered greatly. The state of Israel gave the Houston Jewish community a $1 million donation to help rebuild our community. It was the first time ever that Israel gave back to a diaspora community. And now, are there things we can learn from Israel on how they've reacted to this? Just something interesting, is something to remember in the future as we progress and Israel progresses in its technological and scientific breakthroughs and its advancement. Something for us to consider too, that Israel has a lot to share with us and how we react and what we do. He goes on, the author, there's so much the experts have yet to understand. They think it doesn't mutate, but they're not completely sure. They think children are radically lower risk, but there are concerns here too. Can be infected a second time after you've beaten it? Is it susceptible to climate change? Does it peak at 40 days? Whatever lockdown measures you try to thwart it. It is emphatically not airborne, or might it possibly be, and so forth. And then the author outlines several scenarios of things we just don't know yet. But in the scientifically Israeli context, are our numbers so low because we're not porting them properly? That seems highly unlikely. Because we're not a huggy, kissy nation? But we are. Are we doing so relatively well because we're a relatively young population? Are our hygiene norms notably better? Are our wonderful healthcare professionals uniquely outstanding? These are all questions. Perhaps that's why. But who knows? But the reality is Israel's done really well. Is it because they shut down so soon? Is it because Israelis have taken this more seriously? Is it because of the good medical care? These are all questions that we have to continue to search, continue to look for, continue to find answers, because there might be things that we can learn. I would say, as my own unscientific opinion, I think one thing that does help in could never really work here, but they've had one voice, one government that speaks for all Israelis. In our republic system of federal government, state governments, I know that's not feasible. It's not what we're based on. It's not how the American system was set up. But it does help. If you have people throughout the country following one way, maybe that makes a difference. As the weeks and months go by, we have to wait and see how our approach, how we make out. And certainly Israel is far from done, as no country is. But it's just nice to know that our country, our Jewish country, our Jewish homeland is made out relatively really well. And it's something for us to think about in the future when we are confronted with other crisis situations. Do we look to Israel as a guide? Can we learn from Israeli scientists, doctors, academics, intellectuals? There might be a lot we can learn. As wonderful as America is and how blessed we are to live here, we can be very thankful that Israel too is growing, and Israel too is advancing, and Israel too is really in many ways fulfilling its biblical mandate to be an Or LaGoyim, a light into the nations. We can be very proud. So I've had a little bit of time to spend with you the last few weeks talking to you about why I love Israel. I hope you'll continue to go on in your own study, in your own work, whether it's checking out the Times of Israel website every day or reading different articles or different books. There's just so much we can continue to learn and to explore on what Israel does on a daily basis that can really fill us with pride. Again, thank you for joining me. Hope to see you soon in person, and continue to check out our website for so many opportunities to get involved with Beth Yeshurun virtually as we continue with our virtual online presence.